When I finished Tears of the Kingdom, I was very pleased with the story, so you can understand my shock when I went into the internet and found a lot of negative reception. In this video I'd like to look at the criticisms and explain why I disagree with like 82% of them. First I'm going to talk about the Zelda timeline, of course, but don't worry, I'll talk more about the story with Breath of the Wild and in isolation after cleaning this up. When I was playing Tears of the Kingdom for the first time, I was constantly speculating how this game would fit with all the others. But when I saw that they named another guy Rauru, and especially when I saw the origin of Ganondorf, I immediately understood that this was effectively a new universe. However, almost everyone is trying to explain how this game fits in the Zelda timeline, so I have to explain a bit further. This is gonna get complicated. There are three main takes. The first one is that Zelda visits the past after Skyward Sword and before Ocarina of Time. I absolutely hate this one, because it means that all throughout the games there have been two different Ganondorfs, which is just stupid. Why would he reincarnate if he hasn't died? And since the game hints that Calamity Ganon weakened the seal holding Ganondorf because he destroyed the castle, well. This would also raise the question of why the Zonai never had any remains in the other games, even if we travel to the sky. Overall, if Nintendo wanted to distance themselves from the timeline, why would they go back to it? The second one states that at some point Hyrule is destroyed and is eventually refounded by Rauru. I like this one a lot more, but the reason I don't believe it is because for this to happen, the timelines will have to converge at some point. And sorry, but this just sounds ridiculous. The adult timeline and the child timeline are way too different from each other to end up in the same after so much time. And the many theories about how the convergence will happen are very speculative and doesn't have much, if any, evidence from the games themselves. I mean, this whole explanation is so much more complicated than the third theory, that this is just a new universe unrelated from the previous games. The reason I prefer it is because it is the easiest solution and more according to the desire of the developers to move on from the timeline. With this idea you can explain any inconsistency with the other games. Why are the Sheikah so easy to find if in the other games they always seem to be close to extinct? New universe. Why can the Sora and the Rito exist at the same time? New universe. Why does time travel work differently from Ocarina of Time? New universe. It also doesn't take away the finale of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess with Ganondorf just reincarnating. Also, before you comment Four Swords Adventures, let me tell you, Four Swords Adventures was so obviously meant to be a prequel to A Link to the Past. I mean, the only reason it isn't is because Nintendo really wanted to have Ocarina be the prequel to A Link to the Past. So yeah, no, I don't think Ganondorf ever reincarnated in the previous games. I think Four Swords Adventures is supposed to be a prequel to A Link to the Past, and the quote-unquote official timeline is just not well made. The fact that the game with the most direct references to these games is Skyward Sword, and that they share writers could potentially hint that Skyward Sword is the only game that happened in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. In fact, this could also explain the inconsistencies with Skyward Sword and the rest of the series. Why is Hylia almost nowhere? Perhaps it wasn't as important there. Why does Zelda say the sages created the Master Sword if it was Link? Different origin. Why does Ganondorf always transform into a pig, but this time he transforms into something similar to Demise? Perhaps Demise didn't exist in the other games. Why is Link right-handed in these two games only? He was right-handed in this universe, obviously thanks to the Wii, not a plot point of course. Why does Fi never speak to Link until Breath of the Wild? She didn't exist. See how easy it is to explain things with this theory? By the way, until Nintendo confirms something, this is all speculation. But I really think I'm correct. But I can see some very good counter-arguments coming, so let me debunk them. The first one is Hyrule Historia. However, that book was made for advertising. It wasn't written by writers of Zelda, and later they released another book that changes it. And that book also says that it has interpretations, so books aren't reliable. The second one is that we can get armor from other games. Zelda mentions stuff from other games, and Ruto existed. However, you have to understand that just because this is a new universe, it doesn't mean nothing happened. Just like many characters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man appear in Amazing Spider-Man with different stories, This could also be true here. The hero of Time and Ruto existed, they just didn't fight Ganondorf. Same for the hero of Twilight, Wind, and others. The final reason is that many people are against it, is because it would mean that all the other games are non-canon. But in my opinion they are looking at things wrong. Having a new continuity doesn't mean the previous one is erased or not canon. If that was the case, then everyone should be mad at comic movies. They use the same characters but in a completely new universe with new rules. Besides, with a new universe they can revisit and recreate things from the earlier stories in new ways without affecting the former. For example, bringing Ganondorf back doesn't take away anything from the other games. It doesn't take away his death in Twilight Princess or Wind Waker, and it doesn't take away Ganondorf being completely gone in A Link to the Past and only Ganon remained. And it allows them to introduce new concepts like Fi without creating inconsistencies. I want to clarify that I think it is fine to speculate about the story. I mean, I'm a big fan of Five Nights at Freddy's and Dark Souls. I would be a huge hypocrite if I said it wasn't. But you also have to accept the wishes of the developers. I mean, this isn't harmful at all. They just stopped working on a story they held for 11 years, and that had conclusion. This isn't like DMC where the original story felt lacking and they were replacing it. Now that I finished arguing or why the timeline criticisms are pointless, let's actually talk about the story of the game and the one that precedes it. First, I think I should point valid criticisms in Tears of the Kingdom story, because it has many. It is important, even in a defense, to acknowledge the good criticisms toward the thing that you defend. I am not looking at anybody right now. First of all, it is baffling to see that in 6 years they couldn't think of anything so that you don't have to see the same cutscenes after each dungeon. In Breath of the Wild they did so much better. The way some NPCs age is interesting, to say at least. It can be very confusing. The game didn't explain what happened to the Sheikah technology. There are many theories and they make perfect sense, but the game failed to confirm it, which creates unnecessary confusion. The memories being out of order was a mistake. When you reach the Forgotten Temple, the game shows you the order of the memories. I was quite surprised that many people didn't understand the order. But still, this story isn't like Breath of the Wild where seeing out of order isn't detrimental. But here, if you look for them out of order, it can ruin the experience. I did all of them in order, but many of them are far away from each other. It would have simply been better to make the geoglyphs appear after you find the tear, and no matter what, it should play the next memory. The memories also spoil stuff from the main story. I mean, how are we supposed to be fooled by Puppet Zelda if we saw Ganondorf do that in the past? It also makes zero sense for Link not to tell the main characters that he already knows Zelda's fate. I can accept him not telling random people, that's reasonable, but it is dumb how characters wonder about Zelda and Link refuses to tell them. The solution is simple: log how many memories you can get to the main missions. For example, you can only get memories after 6 once you have defeated Phantom Ganon. In the ending, Link, Rauro and Sonia save Zelda from being a dragon. I actually don't have a problem with this. I mean, the game ending with Zelda as a dragon would have been amazing. But that isn't what these games usually do, and the developers probably didn't want the player to be depressed for the rest of their life. But the problem is that the game says this is impossible and doesn't explain what the fuck happened until the post-credit scene. And the explanation actually makes a lot of sense. When you become a dragon, you lose your body and your mind. So with the power of time, they return her body, and with the power of light, and light can mean many things like life or essence or whatever, they return her mind. But aside from the fact that it could have been a bit more thorough with the explanation, to get there, you have the ending sequence and the credits. A lot of time to think about this. I think they should have explained this before. For example, Mineru could talk to you about a theory to bring Zelda back, but doesn't know how to execute it, and then Rauro and Sonia actually do it. It would also have been nice for them to explain how spirits work a bit better. And finally, the ending doesn't have much of a consequence. Well, I mean, the consequences are all the stuff that Ganondorf has been doing for thousands of years, but something extra would be nice. For example, what if Zelda recognized Link, the Master Sword and stuff from the Sonai perfectly, but had trouble remembering parts of her life? That will tie her even closer to Link and have a tiny bit of consequence. I mean, it's not necessary for a great ending. Majora's Mask has no consequences in its ending except for the stuff that happened before the game begins, but it would have been a bit better. Those are all my major gripes with the story. They're not all, I mean, I have medium and minor gripes. They may seem like a lot, but hey, I said the story was good, not great. And it's still on the same level as the other Zelda stories. Wind Waker's story almost completely disappears after the Tetra reveal, until the finale. I kinda prefer flaws to literally nothing, you know? Midna's death is also reverted with zero explanation in Twilight Princess. I spent an entire video on the problem with the villain in Twilight Princess. In Ocarina of Time, many of the important characters are as complex and interesting as a little puddle. The game has one of the most bullshit moments in the franchise towards the end, with a spell that is never used again. Ganondorf in that game is a pretty shallow character. In Majora's Mask, the literal villain of the game does absolutely zero stuff after the tutorial. The game sometimes has so much mystery that it crosses the line and becomes convenient or sometimes wasted. Talking about wasted, Twilight Princess had one of the best concepts for a character and decided to make him merely a tutorial for optional stuff. Wind Waker didn't explain why there wasn't a hero in the flood, but there is a kid named Link who sleeps a lot and has tons of courage and abilities now. And I could go on and on and on and on. What I'm trying to say is that flaws have always been a part of these games. You might say that they should be getting better, not worse, but the reason many of these don't offend me is that they are a result of taking risks and making mistakes, and that some of these, like world building ones, aren't not very major, to be honest. There are some that do bother me a lot, like the post-post cutscene or the lack of foreshadowing and consequence in the ending, but I still think the good outweighs the bad in the end, like the games I mentioned previously. I saw a comment somewhere that says that the story is pretty bad like the other Zelda games, and although I completely disagree, at least I actually respect it, because the story of Tears of the Kingdom is at the same level of the other ones, so it is obvious that we have different standards. What does annoy me is when someone says that the story is bad, but also say the other games were good, because as far as I see, they're on a similar level. You might be calling me an apologist and that I'm ignoring other flaws, and no, I say these are all the valid criticisms. Now I'll start talking about the ones I find to be unfair. But first I should clarify that although the footage you see is in English, I play the game with Japanese audio and Latin American subtitles, and I'm honestly shocked by the amount of problems the English version has. Now the Spanish isn't completely perfect, but I'm pretty sure by seeing other languages translations that it is more faithful to Japanese. For example,
make any sense. The same thing with Minoru. Minoru was inside the Pura pad all this time, and she doesn't leave a message, she doesn't say anything. And at first I thought, well, maybe she just didn't have the ability to wake up, or until she had that robot body, you know? Or until you find the mask. But no,
she's talking to you.
Well, in one of the memories, quote unquote, where she talks to you, she says, I initially intended to wake up much earlier. So I was like, okay, so you did have the ability to wake up earlier, but you just didn't.
What did she say? Did she give an explanation why she didn't wake up much earlier to help you?
No.
I was gonna, and then that's the end of the sentence?
Watch the cutscene again. She literally gives no explanation as to why. She just says, I initially wanted to wake up earlier. And then she just switches topic. Then she just switches topic to something else, and then it never gets brought up again. And I'm like, you could have
There's gotta be an explanation for that.
Originally, my intent was to awaken when you first found the Pura pad, then to guide you to my construct and assist you on your journey. I had not anticipated a battle with that same construct. You have proven quite adept, and
Inicialmente, mi intención era despertar en cuanto adquirieras la tableta de Prunia. Quería enviar mi espíritu al golem y guiarte, pero los sirvientes del rey demonio truncaron mi plan. Afortunadamente, lograste encontrarme por tu cuenta.
¿Por qué no te vas a la concha tu madre? ¡Para eso te pagamos! ¡Inútil!
So, going forward, I'll use the information from the Latin American translation. So if I say something that seems wrong to you, it's probably because I'm using that translation.
El espadachín que tuvo la osadía de sobrevivir a mi poderosa aura y que ahora se dedica a masacrar a mis siervos. Cuéntame, ¿qué fue lo que te mantuvo con vida en aquella ocasión? Supongo que sería ese patético brazo derecho. No importa, te aseguro que no lograrás sobrevivir una segunda vez. La apariencia de la chica me ha sido muy útil para manipularte y para poder observarte a mi antojo. Sin embargo, ya no la necesito para nada. Adelante, mi creación, fruto de mi ser, acaba con la vida del supuesto héroe. Así que no cuentas solamente con el poder de Rauru para detenerme. Pero tus fútiles esperanzas acaban aquí.
First I'll talk about the time travel elements, then about the characters, then about world building, and I might mention some other things. When I finished the game, one of the first things I noted was that the time travel was pretty consistent, and then I go to the internet and see people calling it nonsensical. Let me explain. When Zelda travels to the past, the things she does there are almost completely irrelevant until after Link encounters Ganondorf. The shrines, islands, and Light Dragon and geoglyphs do not appear until after the upheaval, with the exception of the murals, but the parts that show Zelda are hidden. It is unknown if it is for a convenient accident or if it was purposefully hidden. Because Zelda's presence in the past doesn't change anything significant until after she already traveled, there is no paradox. Ganondorf was destined to destroy the Master Sword, which is the reason Zelda subconsciously decides to travel to the past, to fix it. There are no alternative timelines. Either this is an infinite time loop that was always going to happen, or before the game happens there is an event we don't see where Zelda travels to the past and things are already changed. Regardless, it is consistent, zero paradox. This isn't like Skyward Sword, a game I tried playing but it just didn't work. But at least I've seen hundreds of videos at this point, so I can talk about some stuff. Where in order for Zelda to travel to the past, the Imprisoned must be sealed. But the Imprisoned can't be sealed if Zelda doesn't travel to the past, and Zelda can't travel to the past if the Imprisoned isn't sealed. No, here it is all consistent. Ganondorf was always going to break the Master Sword, like Dragon or not. If Zelda doesn't travel to the past, Ganondorf breaks the Master Sword and Zelda has to travel to the past. If Zelda travels to the past, Ganondorf breaks the Master Sword and Zelda travels to the past. There is no inconsistency. I've also seen people question that. If Zelda is the Light Dragon and has the Master Sword, how is Zelda and the Master Sword in Breath of the Wild? The fact that I had to hear that fucking thing at all shows that some people just need to learn more about time travel theories, because this is baffling. I also want to clarify that Rauru is wrong in this scene because, surprise, he isn't an omniscient being who has a wiki of how the game works, and the thing he says is disproven by Ganondorf knowing Zelda, Link, and the sword that seals the darkness. With time travel out of the way, let's talk about the characters. When it comes down to the main cast in the present, I haven't heard many complaints, and for good reasons. They're all pretty likable and have little character arcs. Tulin starts taking similar behavior to Revali, but because of his foolishness he learns teaming up makes him stronger. Sidon seems to be having flashbacks to when he lost his sister and fears the same will happen to his fiancée, which makes him insecure, but she encourages him back into the guy he was in Breath of the Wild. Richu finally proves she is capable of being the leader of the Gerudo, and Unova makes up for being tricked by Ganondorf. In the past, however, things are a bit different. Although they are mostly liked by people, it seems some had their brains turned off while playing and questioned a bit too much their decisions. Let's start with Zelda. Some people question that she didn't tell Rauru about the corpse she saw, or the fact that he mentioned Rauru's name. This, however, has multiple explanations. First, when Ganondorf mentioned Rauru, he had just said Zelda's and Link's names. She was very terrified. I mean, look at Link's arm. And in the heat of the moment, she didn't realize he said Rauru.
Rauru no言う希望。この程度か。
Just because you are comfortably in your chair paying close attention to Ganondorf's line, doesn't mean the characters are doing the same. Then there's the fact that she didn't connect any of these to Ganon. But you have to consider the characters think the Demon King became Ganon and no longer existed. And from their perspectives, Ganon shouldn't be back for another 10 millennia. And the miasma doesn't work exactly like Malice, so Zelda couldn't know for sure this guy's identity. Anyway, after arriving at the past, Zelda only tells them that there's a problem in her future. This makes sense, maybe they seem like nice people, but of course she wouldn't tell them immediately everything, she doesn't know them. You also have to consider that we don't know how much she tells them. For example, she never mentions Link, but Sonia brings him up. So she does tell them some things off screen, but even then, if she told them later that a corpse attacked her, and they wouldn't be able to tell her anything because they know nothing about that. So if the conversation came up, it was off screen and it wasn't very important. When Ganondorf does appear, she tries to convince Rauru that he cannot be trusted, in part because of his name. That it seems some people didn't realize she was referring to Ganon. Some people also complain that she doesn't mention Ganon, but that is dumb. It's like if you traveled to the ancient Rome and you met a suspicious guy with a mustache whose name is Adolfianum Hitlerian. Of course it would be terrible manners to immediately accuse him. Then we have the people who think she should have recognized him as the mummy, but this is a stretch. Although you can see similarities, you have to remember Zelda saw him for about 50 seconds and it is implied that that was some weeks or months ago. She also forgot to take a picture of the wall that shows base Ganondorf. But even with all of this, Zelda didn't trust Ganondorf in the slightest. In the next memory, Sonia says that Zelda also wants to help them as well as her kingdom. Help them from what if there's no danger? Well, because she thinks Ganondorf is a danger. But no, this would only be good if Zelda spit it all out for the audience to understand it. Because screw using your brain and simple logic, right? Zelda in the end fails to stop Ganondorf, and here is where she realizes that Ganondorf is the corpse, because he releases a ton of miasma / malice, just like the mummy, and has the same very recognizable long hair. After this, she does tell Rauru about Ganondorf because she doesn't have any doubts about it. Zelda's decisions in this game all make sense. They aren't super obvious, but it's not difficult if you stop 2 seconds to think about it. I guess you could say in the beginning she talked about the events, but it is somewhat ambiguous and the murals could perfectly be unreliable. I mean, some people talk that the figure Ganondorf was stealing from was Rauru, but she is very distrustful and wary of Ganondorf, so I don't really see the issue. Now let's move on to Rauru. I've seen tons of people criticize his character for some of his decisions. He let Ganondorf despite knowing of his evil intentions. However, criticizing this is missing the point. First, Rauru had no idea Ganondorf knew about the Secret Stones. To be fair, it isn't clear how Ganondorf knows, but he seems to know a lot about the Zonai, so maybe he just investigated a lot about them. But Rauru didn't know what Ganondorf wanted. Second, Rauru had no idea that Ganondorf was a sorcerer. Ganondorf showed he was a warrior and nothing indicates something else. Rauru greatly underestimated Ganondorf and spread that overconfidence to Sonia. And third, the reason Rauru accepted Ganondorf was to avoid a conflict. He wanted to catch Ganondorf with his hands on a cookie jar instead of fighting the Gerudo tribe.
I want the public to see for the two-bit criminal he really is. He's a fake. He's full of stickum. Catch him in the act. With his hand in a cookie jar.
Rauru is a pacifist. He doesn't want his people to suffer. It's interesting how in real life we criticize war so much, but when a character doesn't pick war as his first option, we criticize them. But the most important part of all, the game and the character fully recognize this. Ganondorf calls out Rauru for his smugness. Rauru accepts all fault for this and decides to sacrifice everything to hold Ganondorf until someone who can defeat him appears.
それでも私はやらねばならぬ。あれは我がおごりにより生まれた。その過ちは償わねばならぬ。そして何よりも私はハイラルの王だ。王は民を、国を守り育むのが務め。たとえこの命を賭してもな。
真の像を縛り魔力を奪う。我を封印するつもりか。小賢しい貴様には似合いの技よ。引くも進むもかなわぬぞ。
侮るな。もとより引く道など持たぬ覚悟。ラール様
我にとっては万年も瞬きと同じ。何も変わらぬ。
いや、悠久の先、貴様を討つ者が必ず現れる。大魔の剣を持つ剣士リンク、この名を忘れるな。
リンク、面白い。楽しみにしておくぞ。
A lot of people talk a lot about Zelda's sacrifice, and for good reasons, but I think Rauru's is many times overlooked. He was still conscious, unlike Zelda. I've also seen people criticizing that he tells Ganondorf about Link, but come on, you've never done something dumb in the heat of the moment. Besides the fact that doing it had no consequences at all. Overall, Rauru is a flawed person who made mistakes but does everything in his power to amend them, which is why he is such a good character. Sonia doesn't get a lot of criticism, but I've seen one or another call her boring. Because women who are gentle are boring in modern society, I guess. I like her because she is a strong woman without needing to be aggressive or tough. She is very gentle and calm, but remains a strong leader and a good wife and mother. Mineru does get more criticism for being boring, but I mean, she is a calm but extremely hard-working scientist. To be fair, she doesn't get tons of screen time in the Geoglyphs, but her character is good. Maybe a few more appearances would have helped. The information we learn about her in that side quest is pretty amusing. Before we move on to who is probably the most important character, I want to point a few things. First, I am hugely disappointed with Pura not being the Sage of Spirit. She has a few design similarities to Mineru. Both of them are extremely talented and hard-working scientists who could even adapt to someone else's technology. Both found a way of gaining immortality. It was a slam dunk! Second, just like in Breath of the Wild, I'm disappointed with Link. His character is there, but in the expressions department he is very lacking. I understand Nintendo wants the player to imagine how Link reacts, but most people don't even see it that way, and if Link is going to have his own character in subtext, then I find this pretty worthless. Well, time to talk about the most controversial character in the game. The tall, black and pretty ripped guy who made girls go crazy. Toro. Now, I understand the many complex criticisms this character has, But we have to consider that... Okay, enough trolling, see you next time.